Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Market Update, where we discuss leading financial and economic developments in Asia, Europe, and North America. My name is Tony. We have a big episode today. The next couple of days are going to be very big episodes, so let's jump in. Today is Liberation Day. That is what US President Donald Trump is calling the day in which his tariffs are to kick in. We, along with the rest of the world generally and markets specifically, have been following this space very closely. A new study from economists at Aston University warns that a global trade war sparked by proposed 25% tariffs on all imports could inflict a $1.4 trillion hit on the world economy. Using econometric modeling of 6 escalating scenarios, the analysis shows that retaliatory tariffs from US trade partners would cause a sharp contraction in global trade, rising inflation and declining living standards. The model simulates how a tit-for-tat tariff spiral could begin with the United States, Mexico, and Canada before spilling into Europe and beyond. Even in a limited scenario, where only Canada, Mexico, and China retaliate, trade could drop by over 30%, leading to inflation and reduced per capita GDP. The US would face a 1.1% hit to economic welfare, but Mexico and Canada would fare worse with declines of 7% and 5% respectively. This point is worth noting, as it is quite critical from a US strategic perspective, because if the United States' strategy is to use tariffs to force trade partners to make concessions, this pain disparity would demonstrate that the US has much more leverage. In a full-blown global trade war, the report argues, US exports could fall by more than 43%, and the country would endure the highest inflationary pressures. Smaller trade-dependent countries like Ireland and South Korea would be especially vulnerable due to their reliance on integrated supply chains. While post-Brexit Britain could potentially benefit from trade flexibility, the report cautions that acting unilaterally could strain EU ties and damage supply chains. Now, this video is being published early Wednesday morning before North America really wakes up, so the details of the president's new tariffs have yet to be released. In our next video, we will do a full breakdown of the tariffs and reactions, as well as implications for the United States, her trade partners, and the world. It is going to be a big episode. There will be a lot to cover, so make sure that you're subscribed for that breakdown. Meanwhile, the Trump administration has launched a federal review into Harvard University's handling of alleged antisemitism, a move that could put up to $9 billion in federal funding at risk. The Departments of Education, Health and Human Services, and the General Services Administration announced the investigation on Monday, stating that it is part of their broader effort to combat anti-Semitism on college campuses. The Education Secretary criticized Harvard, saying that the institution had, quote, failed to protect students from anti-Semitic discrimination, end quote, while fostering, quote, divisive ideologies over free inquiry. End quote. The review will assess whether the university is complying with federal regulations tied to its $256 million in federal contracts and $8.7 billion in multi-year grant commitments. Officials indicated that Harvard could face stop work orders or funding suspensions if found in violation. The move is the latest in a series of Republican-led efforts targeting elite universities, accusing them of promoting, quote, woke ideologies, end quote, referring to a set of left-wing ideas that have become central to the ongoing culture war in many Western countries, and as such is deeply politically divisive. Harvard has taken steps to mitigate scrutiny, including forming an anti-Semitism task force, settling a lawsuit over campus discrimination, and severing ties with the university in the West Bank. Despite these measures, the university remains under legal and federal review. The action follows similar federal interventions, including the withdrawal of $400 million in grants from Columbia University and a $175 million funding freeze at the University of Pennsylvania. Then yesterday, Tuesday, Princeton University confirmed that U.S. government agencies have frozen several dozen research grants. Princeton has received nearly $500 million in government research funding this year and is now one of 60 schools under investigation. The administration argues that these efforts are necessary to uphold free speech and combat discrimination, while opponents see them as politicized assaults on these institutions. Now, one more quick update while we're in North America. According to new numbers published yesterday, U.S. manufacturing activity contracted in March for the first time this year. The Institute for Supply Management, ISM, reported its manufacturing index fell to 49, below the neutral 50 mark, indicating contraction. Prices, meanwhile, surged for a second consecutive month, climbing at the fastest 2-month pace in 4 years. Key indicators pointed to weakening momentum across the sector. Orders fell to their lowest level since May 2023, while production shrank and factory employment dropped at the steepest rate since September. The downturn reflects growing concern among manufacturers over tariff rollouts. With reciprocal duties expected to be announced today, which we just covered, businesses are pausing investments and rushing to stockpile materials. 7 industries, including wood, paper, and plastics, reported contraction, while 9, including textiles and petroleum, saw growth. Inventories rose at their highest level since late 2022 as firms sought to hedge against future price hikes. Amid global instability and raw material shortages, companies remain wary of passing rising costs to consumers, especially as demand shows signs of cooling. The path forward remains uncertain as tariff tensions continue to cloud the outlook. Next up, we move to Asia. A new government forecast warns that Japan's long-feared Big One earthquake could cause up to 298,000 deaths, displace 12.3 million people, and inflict economic damage totaling $1.8 trillion. The report, the first update in a decade published by the government on Monday, models a worst-case scenario involving a magnitude 9.0 quake striking the Nankai Trough, a 900-kilometer-long ocean trench where tectonic plates intersect. The study predicts widespread destruction along Japan's Pacific coast, particularly if the disaster occurs on a winter evening when people are traveling or using heating and cooking appliances. The estimated death toll, though lower than the previous 330,000 projection, would still be catastrophic, with tsunamis accounting for 3 times as many deaths as the initial tremor and building collapses combined. More than 950,000 injuries and the destruction of 2.35 million homes are also expected. Despite advances in seismic preparedness, such as improved building standards, mobile warning systems, and emergency planning, the forecasted economic impact has risen by 26% from the last report. The increase reflects inflation and the enhanced data modeling of tsunami and flood effects. Japan remains one of the most seismically active regions in the world, with densely populated coastal cities at significant risk. A 2017 warning system designed to improve disaster readiness was triggered in August of 2024 by a 7.1 magnitude quake, raising public concern. Experts estimate an 80% chance of a magnitude 8.9 earthquake occurring in the Nankai Trough within the next 30 years. Threatening major urban centers such as Tokyo and Osaka. Shizuoka Prefecture is expected to suffer the greatest loss of life, with projections exceeding 100,000 deaths. As Japan continues to brace for the inevitable, the latest report underscores the urgent need for continued investment in earthquake resilience and disaster preparedness. And finally for today, yesterday, Tuesday, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen warned that the European Union is ready to hit back if the United States follows through with the sweeping new tariffs expected today. Addressing the European Parliament, von der Leyen said that the EU would respond with, quote, firm countermeasures, end quote, expressing, quote, we will negotiate from a position of strength. Europe holds a lot of cards, from trade to technology to the size of our market. End quote. The EU response could target US services exports, where America runs a surplus, including the digital services provided by big technology firms. Possible actions include suspending intellectual property rights and barring US companies from public procurement contracts. The bloc is also considering deploying its so-called anti-coercion instrument for the first time, allowing even more aggressive steps, such as limiting access for US financial services firms to the EU market. However, such moves require the approval of a weighted majority of EU member states. Brussels has held off on retaliating over previous US steel and aluminium tariffs, concerned about sparking a larger trade war. No formal response has yet been made to Trump's proposed 25% tariff on cars. Von der Leyen warned future US targets could include semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, and timber. Despite preparing for a strong response, he stressed that the EU still prefers negotiation, warning that tariffs would worsen inflation and damage jobs on both sides of the Atlantic. Washington, however, is pushing broader demands, including changes to EU tax policies, digital regulations, and food safety standards. Von der Leyen concluded by promising US-EU cooperation on addressing global trade imbalances, proposing the two sides come together for a united policy against the world's biggest contributor to trade imbalances, China. If you enjoyed today's episode of Market Update, don't forget to hit the like button and maybe consider subscribing if you haven't already. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a wonderful Wednesday, and I will see you for a big report tomorrow on Thursday.